Hey everyone! Today, we're jumping into a topic that pretty much all of us can relate to: homework. You know, those late nights at the kitchen table, the arguments, the triumphs. It's been a huge part of school for, well, forever. But the big question is, should it be?
And yeah, this question really gets right to the heart of it, doesn't it? Is homework this amazing tool that builds character and discipline? Or is it just a family wrecker, a source of stress and fights? That's the tension we're going to explore today.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the classic arguments, the for and the against. Then we're going to push past the opinions and see what the actual research says. After that, we'll take a little trip back in time, because this debate is way older than you think. And finally, we'll look at what might be next.
All right, let's dive right into the great debate. And this isn't some quiet academic discussion. Now, these are really strong, deeply held beliefs that are playing out in homes and schools literally every single day.
So you basically got two main camps, right? On one side, you have folks like educator Janine Ben-Bichet, who argue that homework is absolutely vital for teaching life skills, time management, responsibility. But on the other side, critics like Eda Kralovich say it's just a recipe for family drama and student burnout. And there's actually research to back that up.
You see, Ben-Bichet's point is fascinating. She says the real value of homework, especially for the younger kids, isn't always about getting a better grade tomorrow. It's about building those long-term habits of a good learner. It's like practice for the marathon of education, not just a quick sprint for a quiz.
But then, you have the complete opposite view from Eda Kralovich. She's hearing from parents and teachers that it feels like a waste, and she agrees. Her argument is that all the stress and the nightly battles, they just aren't worth the potential upside. And she's not alone here. Researchers at Stanford actually found that homework is a major cause of stress for students.
Okay, so we've got two really strong, really passionate arguments. But what happens when we step back from the opinions and personal stories? What does the cold, hard data tell us? Let's take a look. So back in 2006, a researcher named Harris Cooper and his team did something really smart. They decided to round up all the credible studies on homework they could find. We're talking decades of research, and match them all together to see if they could find a clear signal through all the noise.
What they performed is called a meta-analysis. Think of it this way. Instead of just relying on one single study, which might be a fluke, you combine the results from tons of studies. It gives your final conclusion way more statistical power, making it much more reliable. And what they found? Well, it was a pretty big deal.
And here it is. This is the big one. What Cooper's team found is that the link between homework and how well you do in school depends hugely on your age. For secondary students, that's grades 7 through 12, yep, there's a clear positive connection. More homework tends to mean better grades. But for elementary school kids, whoa, look at that. The link is incredibly weak, almost zero.
So let's just let that sink in for a second. The data is basically telling us that for the little ones, homework doesn't really seem to boost their test scores or grades. And that actually lines up perfectly with what Janine Ben-Bichet was saying earlier, right? Maybe the whole point of homework in elementary school isn't about academics at all, but about teaching things like responsibility.
And get this, the study found another little twist. It really matters who you ask. When students report how much homework they do, you see that positive link to achievement. But when parents of young kids report it, the connection is actually slightly negative. So, why would that be? Well, one idea is that parents of kids who are struggling might be more involved and aware of the homework grind, which could be skewing the numbers. It seems the students themselves might be telling the more accurate story here. Now, all this back and forth might feel very current, but if you think this debate is new, you'd be mistaken. We're just the latest generation to argue about it. Our love-hate relationship with homework has been swinging back and forth for more than 100 years.
Seriously, for over a century, public opinion has been a total pendulum. You go back to the early 1900s, and people were worried it was unhealthy. Then, bam! 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik, and suddenly there's this national panic that we're falling behind. Homework becomes a tool for national security. A few years later, in the 60s, the pendulum swings right back. It's seen as too much pressure. Then the cycle repeats in the 80s with the A Nation at Risk report. It seems every generation rehashes this debate based on whatever it's anxious about at the moment.
So, with all that in mind, the mixed research, the crazy history, where does that leave us? Well, the conversation is starting to change. It's moving beyond just more homework versus less homework and toward a much smarter question. What's the best way to learn after the school day ends?
And one of the biggest ideas gaining steam is something called project-based learning, or PBL for short. This is all about shifting away from the classic worksheet and toward projects that feel more engaging and have a real-world connection.
And you can really see the difference here, right? Traditional homework is usually about you, by yourself, practicing something you learned in class. The goal is reinforcement, discipline. But with PBL, it's a whole different ballgame. The focus is on critical thinking and collaboration. The goal is to apply what you know to solve a real problem, which means you have to get creative.
But look, the path forward probably isn't about just throwing out one thing and replacing it entirely with another. It's much more likely about finding a smart balance. It's about teachers asking, what's the goal of this assignment? And then picking the right tool for the job. Sometimes that's a worksheet, and sometimes it's a big collaborative project.
And all of this really brings us to the biggest question of all, doesn't it? Maybe, just maybe, we've been asking the wrong question this whole time. Maybe it's not about if we should have homework. Maybe the real question is, what kind of learning do we actually want to happen after that final bell rings? That's the conversation worth having. Thanks for tuning in.